Factors. Back here at Stop Logic Motorsports, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a disclaimer. Well, other than I have a messy shop, I always have a messy shop. This next series of videos is not really geared towards experienced riders. I mean, if you're watching this, you can feel free to flame me over stuff that you think that I'm missing or anything like that, but I had a subscriber request, and he's brand new to biking, so we're going to do like a miniature series of how to look for things on a used bike that will cause trouble, how to do some basic stuff like oil changes, working on your tires, air filter servicing, stuff of that nature, kind of like a intro to riding. So I think it's really important, especially for all of us folks that have been riding for a while, that we grow the sport. Each of us should be an ambassador to the sport. We should encourage new people to join, and whenever they do join, we should help them achieve their goals. In his case, kind of learning the ins and outs of a bike. Most of the work I'm going to be doing is on this 1996 KDX 200 that I've restored. I'll be doing a little bit of stuff on the KTM 250 I've got. It doesn't really matter the bike. I'm going to do the service that needs to be done. So in this case, I'm going to be doing an oil change today. Thanks, Hank. And so your question is going to be, you've only ridden this bike twice since you last had it apart. Why are you changing the oil in it? Well, I haven't released a video about it. We did a full clutch replacement, basket, steels, everything else. I'll put that video out later, but that's going to be kind of not for this line of videos. But whenever you replace your clutch friction plates or you're breaking in a new bike, the first oil change is pretty crucial. So in my case, I do a new set of clutch fiber plates. I do one ride. I put in some cheap oil like Rotella 15W40, and I do a break-in ride on the clutch plates. And then if you have any schmutz or fibers from the manufacturing process, you drain that out in the first change, and you take care of any sort of like particulate that's in the bike. The same like when you have a break-in procedure, like on a CRF, what is it, 250L, they recommend an oil change at 600 miles, keeping your throttle below a third and then a half and yada yada. There's a lot of opinions on break-ins. If you're buying a used bike, not really crucial. If you're buying a new bike, read the manual and follow it, or get onto the forums with a bunch of people just telling you to rag it. Just take that thing out there and beat it to death. Well, I mean, this sometimes, that helps some of your components seat a little better. It just really depends on the bike you've got. But anywho, yeah. Back to focusing on task at hand. We're going to be just doing an oil change on this. So what's crucial before you get your oil changes, you make sure you don't use car oil. Anything that has a bottle of oil that says like energy conserving on it, have a little metal here. It says energy conserving. Don't use it. Look at what your manufacturer recommends for the weight. And the other big thing you're going to want to look for whenever you're dealing with a wet clutch bike is JASO MA2. It's a Japanese oil specification for use on wet clutches. And the reason you want to use something that's JASO rated is it doesn't have shear additives in it. So the way your clutch works is it's a series of friction and steel plates that expand and come together to put power to the end of the bike. And if you're using friction modifiers, your clutch relies on a certain degree of friction to drive the bike. So if you use the friction modifiers, you just burn up your clutches over and over and over, and these things are like $40 to $60 a pack of steels and stuff. It kind of gets expensive to put the wrong oil in. Now for break-ins, I usually use Rotella just because it's like $4 a quart, and I'm going to change it almost immediately after the first ride. Then from there, like on my KTMs, I use the Motorex $20 a quart fancy freaking gold brick oil. On my less fancy and high-strung bikes, I use Lucas 10W40 for wet clutches. semi-synthetic. Just read your manual. And if you have a bike that doesn't have a manual, go to the forums or Facebook pages associated with that model where you sometimes have like owner or company interaction. Like, for example, GPX has their owner regularly interacting with people, kind of giving you advice on how to take care of your bike. The Orion Cycles guys, same with them. You can get a wealth of knowledge just by kind of hopping into the group and learning the ins and outs of your bike. That's one thing, like, versus a Japanese bike or an Austrian bike to a Chinese bike, is that you don't have a service manual or a owner's manual with it that gives you all the specifications, like the amount of oil you need to run in it, what type of weight, etc., etc. That's when the customer service for the China bike company sometimes comes into play, and you rely on them to help you kind of navigate your ins and outs. You're going to want to know what type of brake fluid you've got to run. You're going to want to know how much and what type of oil to run in the engine. If it's a two-stroke, you're going to want to learn the premix ratio. And since you're not buying a two-stroke, I'll kind of briefly touch on it. But if you ever have a two-stroke, just reach out to me and I'll kind of walk you through the finery of that. And then, what octane you've got to run, what air pressures are recommended, though honestly we'll touch on that on a different video. And then just go from there. So yeah, we'll get underway with this oil change, and sorry to have such a long intro with this, but kind of starting a brand new segment of videos, so you gotta kick it off with a little extra detail. Alright, well, we'll get after it. Alrighty, so we're going to get underway on working on this bike. So, if you've got a bash plate, 99% of the time you're going to have to remove your bash plate to actually get at your oil plug, but I got this Ricochet bash plate that actually lets me get right to my drain plug. So, I'm looking at a 14 millimeter, and now I'm just gonna find me a socket that'll do the trick. Get my oil pan, my Earl pan, and we're gonna crack open this top here and start getting this oil out. So as I said earlier, this is a fresh set of clutch plates. Normally, by the way, you have like a plastic deal up here. The previous owner put this metal deal on here, so it takes a little more doing. He'll crack your top, and sometimes, like on a 4-stroke, you'll want to actually run the bike for a minute or two so it's a little warmer and the oil drains out more completely. On 2-stroke, it's vital. On a 4-stroke, your engine oil is actually oiling the entire engine. On a 2-stroke, it's just the clutches. What oils your engine on a 2-stroke is what's called premix. It's mixing oil into your gas. You premix 2-stroke oil into your gas, and that lubricates your crank and all of your other creamy engine nougat. But yeah, that's the long and short of it. So right now I had Rotella in here to do a little break-in. And since I put 2 rides on this fresh clutch pack, you're probably gonna see a little bit of schmutz come out. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. Now, a lot of bikes too also have a crush washer. I recommend replacing the crush washer every single time if you were thinking ahead to have that, or every other time. Manufacturer, of course, will say do it every time. Woo! Yeah, that's some natty oil. Yeah. So yeah, we got a lot of clutch bits in there. Now, just because you see it look a little milkshaky and gray doesn't mean the bike's like having a massive mechanical failure or anything. That is really common whenever you have a fresh set of clutches in a bike. And it's like with anything that you manufacture. Like, let's think of another way to put it. you're buying fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, and before you just like sit down and plunk down and eat them, you wash them off because there's schmutz from shipping and all this other stuff. Kind of same concept here with your oil. Stand the bike up a little bit straighter so we get more oil out. We have fresh clutch plates. They're going to have some manufacturing debris on them. Same general concept. Clean off your drain plug. And what you're going to want to look for here, if you have a water-cooled bike, I think that you're going to be getting a air-cooled bike. But let's say you have a water-cooled bike. You're going to look for this to come out like sort of white, like milkshake, or have like a large green tint to it. That lets you know that you might have a water pump seal issue. Just keep in mind, if your oil doesn't look right, ask someone for a little bit of help. Now I'm just going to let this run out for a little while, and then we'll pop back in here, cap it, or drain it, plug it, and fill it and cap it. I know this isn't the most exciting video, but you want to do this on a somewhat regular basis. So your manufacturer sometimes will have like a recommendation. Let's say you got a dual sport bike. What's a good one? A WR250R recommends oil change every 8,000 miles. Oil and filter every 8,000 miles. But you're racing your bike. You're doing like mud races, hair scrambles. You're beating that engine up. Change it more often. I recommend if you do a race, change it after every race. If you're trail riding, every 3 rides or so, or per manufacturer specification if you're low strung 4-stroke. Just, one way you can kind of tell that you need an oil change and it's before time is, let's say that you're shifting and you notice that the bike has like a hesitation or a clunk into shifting. It's really hard to shift. That's letting you know your oil is a little bit beat. Another way that you should know to change your oil is if you've been out riding and you're in the mud and you've been, feathering that clutch and all of a sudden that clutch doesn't want to engage anymore, or it's fading really bad. When you're back at the house, go ahead and change that oil out. Alright, so we're just getting a last little bit out of here. Alright, we'll button this back up. Now, every bike has a torque specification. I guess, with exception in the case of sometimes your bikes don't have a torque specification for the drain plug. In my case, I kind of do it by feel unless I'm working with a newer 4-stroke, like the CRF 450RL. I actually under-torqued it 10% because there was evidence of cases cracking from over-torquing. They had a kind of a wonky drain bolt. One piece of advice is practice on something that doesn't have an engine, but kind of learning how to tighten things. First, you always start by hand. It's kind of like Mechanic 101, but always start all of your plugs and bolts and everything by hand. That way, if you're starting to cross thread, you're not going to just wrench it in there with a ton of torque and foul out some threads. You foul out these threads on the bottom of a bike, or anywhere on your engine case, really. You're in for a world of hurt. Either thread chasing or putting in helicoils or something of that nature, and that's going to be a bit beyond your ability, or all the way up to replacing cases. So we got that in nice halfway, not cross-threaded. And you're like, well, you mentioned torque specifications. Why are you just sitting here ripping on it with a wrench? Well, believe if memory serves me right, this is like a 14 foot-pounds torque. I've gotten used to kind of doing what's called choking up on your ratchet and tightening it with it choked up so you're not applying as much torque. Just enough to where it feels like it's in there snug, but don't tighten it beyond belief. You can go back and hit it with a torque wrench later if you want. I would recommend, if you have torque specifications, go back, grab your torque wrench, set it for a little bit below, and then listen for the pop. I need to dig up the torque specification on this so I can show you what it would look like using a torque wrench for this, showing you the proper way to do this. So the manual says 14 foot-pounds. My advice is start like 10% less or a couple pounds light. So in my case, I'm going to start at 12 foot-pounds and then pop it in there. So I got a torque wrench, got our foot-pounds. Funny enough, we're at 12. And I'm going to try and zero this thing out. I've been naughty, apparently. Alright, so we got our drain plug. That pop right there lets you know you're at torque, so I was right about 12 foot-pounds. So in a two-stroke, you can actually use ATF Type F as well. You don't want to use this in your four-stroke. Just bear in mind, this is a two-stroke deal, just for gearbox side only. So what are we going to use this ATF Type F for? Well, you can use it for clutches because it actually does work on clutches. Older two-strokes. I wouldn't use it on a modern two-stroke. This will never see my KTM. But ATF Type F works really well for clutches. It doesn't have friction modifiers. The only deal is you have to change it a little more often than regular oil. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. And I'm going to pop 750 milliliters of transmission oil. So if you're going to do the ATF Type F path, change it every ride. One thing that you'll notice about it is it shifts a little smoother than 10W40, but it's a negligible amount. Anyone that's like can claim that they can feel like a huge difference, I would say it's a little suspect that you can feel that much of a difference with ATF Type F. So we're gonna pop this in here. And the torque specification is 14 foot-pounds, but since it's a slightly older bike, I'm going to go a little under, a little reduction down to 12 foot-pounds, just for safety's sake, and you always start your bolts with your fingers. Alrighty. Another fringe benefit to ATF Type F, especially if you use a high mileage formula on these older bikes, is they have seal conditioners in them. Not like arch seals like rubber conditioners. Project Farm has a great video on it, showing that it swells up your rubber on your seals. So you got a little bit of leaky bits in here. It kind of helps with that a smidge. Come on. All right, so you'll use your torque. When you hear the pop, you let it be. Or beep if you're fancy pants and have a nice torque wrench. Alright, so rock some ATF Type F. Now on a two-stroke, one advantage of using ATF Type F is if you have a crank seal leak, it smokes a ton more than regular oil. So when you start feeling a crank seal letting go, it has a definite odor to it, and it a little easier to spot a crank seal issue. So, right about it, the perfect amount, the magic number. So you don't want to use like Dextron or Mercon or anything because those transmission fluids have friction modifiers. This ATF Type F is like for old-fashioned cars. And if you have an old enough bike, the recommendation for your fork oil instead of being fork oil will be transmission fluid. Go figure. So, alrighty. So we're right at the lower end of the sight line. If we set it up straight, it'll be towards the top. Okay, why are we being a little... Easy there, sticky wicket. So we got our ATF Type F. I guarantee you when I change this again, it's going to look a little funny. The other thing about ATF Type F is it has a bit more detergents in it, so if you have any schmutz in your crankcase, it'll definitely pull it out. It'll look a little dirtier. So we're going to just kind of snug this top bolt down. And then we'll go out and fire this thing up and make sure that everything seems to be in place. We got our plug torqued, top just snugged up, fluids in, and I don't want to start this in an enclosed area for, obvious reasons. I mean, yeah, it's a 2-stroke, so it's going to be smoky, but, the whole carbon monoxide thing. Believe it or not, I have a little bit of self-preservation instinct for a person who rides dirt bikes since they were a kid. Alright. I need to get a wider door on this shop. Soon I'll have another project on this bike where I'm going to be swapping the front forks with DRZ 250 forks. They're a direct swap, but they have adjustability unlike these KDX forks. So, anywho, let's see if we're grumpy today. Not a bit. And usually after I do a little transmission fluid change, I do a little run in to see how the bike, just generally shifts. I used to have a much bigger yard for this. Alright, we're shifting. At least first and second. Shifter feels nice and smooth, butter smooth. Yeah, there's no leaks, so yeah. Oil change. About the same thing on your bike. Now, if you've got a 4-stroke, usually on the other side you'll see a little puck here with a oil filter. I change mine every other time, unless I'm pushing the oil change or unless I, torch a clutch. You replace it. Now, pay special attention to the way they say to orient the oil filter. If you put it in backwards, you're gonna have some interesting engine problems. So, yeah, pay attention to that. Change your O-rings with it. But that's your basic intro to change oil in the bike. I pulled some air filters out. I have some videos I can clip together of me doing an air filter, so we're gonna work on that. Those are gonna be your two main things: air filters and oil changes. We'll touch on some other basics too, but at any rate, hopefully you found this helpful. If you didn't, I apologize. I'll try harder to be helpful, but it is what it is. Anywho, see you on the next one.